Picture this. We're in Erfurt, Germany. It's the 14th century. Within this thriving medieval town, there is a Jewish community that has been around since the 10th century. Fast forward 6 or 7 centuries, a salvage excavation uncovers a cemetery, and this is a cemetery with a particularly dark history, as many of those buried here were part of a minority and persecuted group, and at the time were blamed for the Black Death. Ultimately, they were murdered over superstitious connotations present at that time. But this is not a history video. If you watch this channel regularly, you know we are interested in data and DNA. As such, these medieval skeletons are actually biological hard drives. I'm Krutik, I have a PhD in genetics, and today we're going to assess how ancient genomes from Ashkenazi Jews can tell us about the Ashkenazi bottleneck. If you look at the modern Ashkenazi Jewish population, you see something quite alarming. Very high rates of disease-causing mutations which compound in chronic conditions. Factor XI deficiency, acyl-coenzyme A dehydrogenase deficiency, and some hereditary cancers too, are just some of the hereditary diseases that are passed down in higher proportions in Ashkenazi Jewish populations than in other populations. And this can be somewhat explained by IBD, or identity by descent. This means that DNA within modern unrelated Ashkenazi people from distinct geographical niches do contain long stretches of DNA which are largely the same. This certainly contributes to a higher level of pathogenicity found within this group, and tells us two key factors: that millions of Ashkenazi Jews today descend from a very small founder population that went through a bottleneck event, which we describe as the Ashkenazi bottleneck. And this factor is compounded by a high degree of endogamy, which has occurred in this group for centuries. But if you ask me, here's the million-dollar question, and the real reason behind this video. Do we have any clues that can tell us when this bottleneck occurred? And to do this, we're going to look at a pretty recent study. To find this out, we have to look at the Erfurt Ashkenazi Jews. Researchers took 593,000 autosomal SNPs from these medieval specimens and merged them with a modern population dataset. This allows us to compare the 33 medieval Ashkenazi Jewish people to 944 modern peoples, including 7 modern Ashkenazi Jews and 86 other Jewish populations from Turkish, North African and Middle Eastern descent. However, not all of these medieval specimens contained enough high-quality SNPs to perform robust assessments, but some interesting facts did emerge. First, the similarities. The Erfurt Ashkenazi Jews are incredibly genetically similar to modern Ashkenazi Jewish people. This implies that a strict level of endogamy, the practice of marrying within the community, or in another sense, creating a social barrier for gene flow, was already in full swing 600 years ago. And this has clearly been a stable social force within the Ashkenazi Jewish people for at least the last 600 years, continuing into the modern population. An interesting note was that the researchers described the Ashkenazi Jewish as being more diverse than the modern Ashkenazi Jews. Look at this PCA graph. Think of it as a genetic map of the modern peoples in contrast to the Erfurt Ashkenazi Jewish people. The Erfurt individuals stretch out along this long line, a gradient between European and Middle Eastern populations. In fact, 2 distinct clusters can be established within this one community. Researchers call them Erfurt EU and Erfurt ME. The former fall closer to European populations, specifically with an affinity towards Eastern European ancestry, whereas the latter is much closer to Middle Eastern group and very close to modern Turkish Jews. Now hold on, I know what you're thinking. You're comparing a handful of ancient people to a handful of modern genomes and making claims. Surely we don't have enough sample size to make such claims. I had the exact same thoughts. It feels shaky, right? But some maths backs it up. Researchers ran F4 statistics, a rigorous test for gene flow between groups. And the data holds. The Erfurt EU cluster unequivocally shares more genetic drift with Eastern Europeans, and the Erfurt Middle Eastern group pulls towards the Middle East. And I agree, more data from more sites would be great to establish stronger results and stronger conclusions. But that's not within the remit of one study, and I can empathize that getting your hands on such ancient genomes requires going through a lot of ethical barriers and also requires a lot of luck. This suggests that in medieval Erfurt, the Jewish population had a substructure. There were likely distinct families or social circles with recent migration histories, living side by side, but not yet fully homogenized into a single cluster we see today within the Ashkenazi Jewish people. Now you may be wondering, how did these two fairly distinct genetic groups become one over the last 600 years? To put it bluntly, forced migration, moving eastwards towards Poland and Russia, this forced the subgroups to blend into the modern Ashkenazi Jews we see today. Here's a really interesting fact I did not realize until I started research for this video. In the modern Ashkenazi Jews, 40% of the entire population can trace their lineage back to 4 ancestral women. The distinct haplogroups are K1A1B1A, K1A9, N1B1B1, and K2A2A1. I'm gonna get very tired of saying these haplogroups by the end of this video. Anyways, these lineages are extremely uncommon outside of the Ashkenazi Jewish population. So, did our medieval Erfurt specimens have them? Oh yeah, they definitely did. A staggering 35% of the Erfurt individuals carried K1A1B1A. This is a lineage virtually absent outside non-Jewish Europeans. At the start of this video, I asked a pretty interesting question. When did the Ashkenazi bottleneck occur? With this new data, we might have a good estimate. The researchers placed the most common recent ancestor between the modern and ancient Ashkenazi Jews, which suggested a woman who carried this variation of the human mitochondrial genome, known as K1A1B1A, lived roughly 1500 years ago. So around 1000 years before these medieval Ashkenazi people lived. This is a very important lineage. K1A1B1A, that's the last time I'm saying that in this video. This is a very large branch of the modern Ashkenazi Jews, accounting for roughly 20% or 1 in 5 Ashkenazi Jews. Again, with such few samples, it doesn't feel right to make such speculations. However, if 35% of the whole town shared the exact same maternal ancestors in the 1300s, then the founder effect absolutely occurred before then. This proves that this lineage was already dominating the population long before the 14th century, and therefore the Ashkenazi bottleneck had to occur long before this date. Finally, let's look at runs of homozygosity, or ROH for short. In the general population, stretches of identical DNA from your parents are very short. In a founder population, they are in fact very long. When scientists sequenced the medieval Ashkenazi Jews from Erfurt, they found some of the highest levels of runs of homozygosity recorded for that time period, around 44 centimorgans on average. What does that mean? That's a very arbitrary measurement, isn't it? Well, it confirms with striking clarity that a severe genetic bottleneck did occur around 1500 years ago, one which resulted in a group of survivors with no more than 1,000 individuals in all likelihood. This tiny group of survivors rebuilt the population because they exclusively married within the community. In other words, they constricted their gene flow using endogamy. These very long stretches of DNA preserved. This created the exact genetic structure we see in the 14th century and the Ashkenazi Jews today. And this is what ultimately has led to the higher levels of specific diseases occurring within this group. So what have we learnt in this video? We have learnt that by the 14th century, the Ashkenazi Jewish genetic identity had already been established, but it was surprisingly a bit more diverse than the modern Ashkenazi Jewish population we have today, with the Erfurt EU and Erfurt ME groups displayed in the PCA. We also learnt that Ashkenazi Bottleneck is pretty ancient. We have a speculative date of 1500 years ago, which also coincides with the maternal haplogroup analysis, where the K1A1B1A woman lived roughly 1500 years ago, according to most common recent ancestor assessments. And that is the power of ancient DNA. I've been Krutik, follow me on X, subscribe, hit the bell for more notifications, and if you enjoy this type of scientific content, please subscribe to the channel, it really helps. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time for more science.